There's a story about Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, author of the seminal book on death and dying, and a little boy who was in the final stages of leukemia. The doctor asked the little boy to draw a picture of his illness, and the child produced a scary self-portrait with thunderclouds in the sky and a cannon that was pointing directly at his heart. When the doctor saw it, she didn't address his fears or try to change his feelings. Instead, she took the picture and sketched a figure of herself in her white coat, standing close to the tiny boy in the drawing, with her arms wrapped securely around his shoulders. A few days later, the boy returned to therapy and began to draw another picture with no prompting from the doctor. But this time the sun was shining. There were flowers along the ground, and the child in the picture was smiling. In that artistic interchange between the doctor and the little boy, we find a simple but profound interpretation of the 23rd Psalm, a clear depiction of trust in the dependability of one who stands with us as we face the fears and the suffering of life. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. Now, I suspect the 23rd Psalm is one of the most familiar passages in all of Scripture. It's part of popular culture, appearing in countless movies where a chaplain comforts a dying soldier or a priest walks a convict to an execution. It's frequently requested for a funeral or a memorial service because it brings comfort to families who are suffering the pain of grief and loss. And the words never fail to take me back to Sunday school at Patilla Memorial Methodist Church, where my Aunt Cleo first taught me to say it by heart. I was probably only 6 or 7 at the time, but I remember I really liked that psalm a lot. It was short. And given the then popular Sunday school teaching method of reading our way around a circle verse by verse, it went quickly and was fairly easy to understand, in spite of all those biblical sounding words that nobody really used, like maketh and leadeth and restoreth. But for the people of Israel, that 23rd Psalm was neither a funeral song nor a manageable memory verse for a child. It was a pilgrimage song. It was sung by travelers on the road to Jerusalem in a time and a place where a physical journey often intersected with one's spiritual pilgrimage through life. Some of you might be particularly drawn to the King James version of that psalm. But did you know that in spite of its comforting familiarity, the King James contains a mistranslation of one of the original Hebrew words? The Hebrew psalmist doesn't speak of a valley of the shadow of death, but rather a valley of deep darkness, the kind of valley that might provoke anxiety or danger or fear. This is the darkness in which we sometimes find ourselves, not only in death, but at many stages of life when someone who could guide our path would come as a welcome relief. Of course, people who aren't particularly familiar with the scripture might think that a shepherd is not a likely choice to help navigate a valley of deep darkness. After all, shepherds aren't exactly part of our everyday world. So we have to work a little to get behind the words and educate ourselves in an Eastern understanding of what it meant for a shepherd to care for sheep. In the biblical world, the shepherd is the one in front. He's leading, not driving the flock from behind. He doesn't push the sheep or hurry them along. He guides them steadily with wisdom and a familiar voice. And the sheep don't rush out ahead. They're not trying to do or succeed or produce results. They're content to receive and accept, to trust and respond. The sheep know their job, and their job is to follow the shepherd. In the geography of first century Palestine, green pastures would have been almost non-existent, and still waters rarely seen. When one set out on a pilgrimage, the dark valleys, surrounded by craggy rocks, were perfect hiding places for thieves and for robbers, the ones intent on violence or murder. For the pilgrims to sing about God's protection in that kind of difficult circumstance was to respond a lot like the little boy who was afraid to die. God doesn't take away the thunderclouds or the cannons. God places an arm around the shoulder and stands alongside. In those precarious places, the pilgrims knew that they were never really alone. Well, it's a long way from first century Palestine to 21st century USA, but the social geography in which we find ourselves is just as riddled with dark valleys and craggy rocks that are home to violence and murder. Even if we set coronavirus aside, which these days is just about impossible, we still contend with random shootings carried out against groups of unsuspecting people, racially driven assaults and killings, immigrants imprisoned and returned home to an almost certain death. And that's without even mentioning tornadoes, floods, and other acts of nature. The fear is real. The anxiety abounds, and death is frequently the unwelcome guest at the table. So when we find ourselves in a valley of deep darkness, we gravitate to a pilgrimage psalm to help us make the journey home. We take out our poetic crayons and draw in all of the details: green grass, still waters, pastures where we can rest, with a shepherd whose reputation, which is exactly what that phrase namesake means, a reputation that depends on his willingness and his ability to lead us away from the valley of despair. Did you know the statement, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," is an audacious and, in its context, an exceedingly political claim? You see, the king was referred to as the shepherd of the people, responsible for provision and protection. But the king didn't always follow through. And this was especially true for the poor and those who lived on the margin. We see it still in our governments today. Speeches claim that opportunity is there for anyone who wants it, but demonstrations in the street suggest that reality is otherwise. When the psalmist claims that the Lord is the shepherd, it's intended to give voice to absolute allegiance to a power other than the power of the king. It's an expression of trust and confidence that God will do what the government fails to do, that the ones who subsist in the valley can expect to receive what they need from the hand of God, which is to say, from the open hands of God's people. Of course, sorting out the difference between need and want is the tricky part. The necessities of life are listed in the psalm. There's food in the pasture, there's water to drink, there's a safe place to rest. And yet the gifts of God's abundance don't seem to satisfy. We take them for granted and we focus our efforts on accumulating more and more. even the followers of Jesus, the shepherd, have forgotten sometimes how to draw ourselves into the living picture of so many of God's children who are always under threat or living in poverty. In the psalm, the words, "He restores my soul," can also be translated, "He brings me back from my wanderings." It's another way of saying we don't have to figure everything out by ourselves or make the spiritual journey through our life alone. Whether it's a personal tragedy that descends or someone we know or love who is experiencing a tragedy, or something even as comparatively insignificant that disturbs our memories and our expectations. The psalm tells us we can turn to God for comfort and for help. I think the last few verses of the psalm are my very favorite. It's the scene where God serves as a gracious host, preparing a banquet, anointing the guests, setting out an overflowing cup. It's a magnificent party, and it signals a turning point in the song. The pilgrims have arrived safely in Jerusalem, and they are being lavishly welcomed into God's fold. You remember that nursery rhyme so many of us learned as children. Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. Leave them alone, and they will come home wagging their tails behind them. It's a cute rhyme, but when it comes to matters of faith and our spiritual pilgrimage, it doesn't ring true. In John's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 11, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd, and I lay down my life for the sheep." This is the great good news. God has absolutely no intention of leaving the sheep alone, in the hope that they will somehow find a way to safely. The God of the psalm is the God who, come what may, patiently leads until the sheep are at home.